were lost in a fire just a few days ago. Now, that unfortunately contradicts what Mr. Nanga had said earlier. He had confirmed that they had procured just enough equipment for this particular election. That particular equipment was meant for this city, Kinshasa city, where the election and around several places around the country were to be held. Now, today, he says it will be postponed until the 30th.
Well, Leon, the opposition candidate Martin Fayulu has termed the postponement unacceptable. He says the polls must go on Sunday. What's been the reaction there from other candidates and the local people?
Well, Mr. Fayulu, like you say, had said that the reaction by the Electoral Commission was definitely unacceptable. He said they had just as much time to prepare for this particular election. Other candidates too have expressed the same kind of sentiment. Unfortunately for them now, that they are not quite many are the front runners like Mr. Fayulu. But yes, the sentiment is pretty much shared like all the other candidates who say now at this particular moment the Electoral Commission has done the country a disservice in postponing this particular election.
Many had expressed concern, though, Leon, over violence should the elections fail to take place. What is the situation there? Is that concern still valid? Is it in place?
Well, there were a few spurts of violence just a few days ago. Students from the University of Kinshasa took to the streets to demonstrate then as a rumor that the election will be postponed. Now it has been confirmed. Kinshasa is slightly calm this evening. We can only look forward to see what may happen between now and then, the 30th when the election will go on. But for now, the city is slightly calm, and we'll look forward to seeing what will happen around the country itself.
All right, Leon Sunyange joining us there from Kinshasa with an update. Well, let's discuss this further and broaden our discussion. In studio with me, Dr. Hassan Kanenje. He's an international relations expert and director at the Horn Institute here in Kenya. Dr. Kanenje, thank you for joining us on Africa Live. First off, the election has been postponed to the 30th. What are the implications, though, of this postponement for the DRC?
I think in the immediate hours following this postponement, there is likely to be a wait-and-see attitude. Remember, this is the third time we're postponing this election. But in the light of what just happened, especially the banning of ballot boxes, of course, we expected the elections were not going to be held on time. Now, if it happens that the government do not have a clear and the electoral body doesn't offer or provide a clear timetable for elections and who is going to conduct it, I think you're likely going to see protests that may turn violent, especially in Kinshasa and some other opposition strongholds.
What do you make of the situation now, though, in the DRC, aside from the Ebola outbreak? What do you make of the situation, as you mentioned, the burning of the electoral material there, now the postponement of the election? What do you make of all this?
You know, Beatrice, in the art of politics, generally, power never sits willingly. And this would have been the first time there is a democratic transition of power in the DRC. And there is a chance that the status quo is fighting back, as it always does. This was not accidental by all intents and purposes. And so you expect that the status quo will still try to do the same thing. However, I think the international community and the government of Kinshasa should be aware that postponing this election further may actually plunge Congo into chaos. And
that is the other question, though, because what next then for the DRC's stability here?
I think there has to be certainty with regard to when the election is going to be held. And the international community, I think, should step in, especially the United Nations, to help them, because when it comes to credibility, the opposition does not trust that the government is willing to conduct a free and fair election. Now, in the absence of that certainty and a timetable, is going to be extremely challenging. Now, countries concerned and countries involved, including the neighbors, should actually assist the DRC at this stage. It's the second largest country on the continent, with a population of almost 85-90 million people. It should be assisted to make sure that it actually transitions from one president to another, especially given the critical importance of this election in the Congo after a very long time, I must say, because you haven't had democratic elections in the Congo, I think, since independence.
And very briefly, though, how important is it for the DRC to hold this election?
This is critically important. Remember, the current president came in after the assassination of his father, Laurent Desire Kabila. And ever since, Congo, or DRC, has been embroiled in conflict. Part of it was actually regional, what has come to be called the Africa's World War. And there is a lot of pressure from different parts of Congo, not just from candidates who've been bad from contesting, but a desire to see something different. And if the election is not held now, I think we may lose Congo as we know it. And so all those who are concerned, the international community, the United Nations, the African Union, I think they should step in to actually assist Congo and ensure they conduct free and fair elections to prevent another potential conflict within the Democratic Republic of Congo.
All right, Dr. Hassan Kanenje, thank you very much for your insights on the Congo. Let's now go to Sudan, where hundreds of protesters have taken to the streets against price increases of bread and fuel. At least one person is reported to have been shot dead in the disturbances. The protests were initially concentrated in the towns of Atbara, Ed Damar and Berber in the River Nile state in the north of the country, but have now spread to other regions. Sudanese police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters. On Wednesday, demonstrators in Atbara city set fire to the local headquarters of the ruling party, forcing authorities to impose a state of emergency and a dusk to dawn curfew. The South Sudan refugee situation is the largest on the African continent. More than 2.5 million South Sudanese refugees are currently struggling to survive in exile. They fled to neighboring Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia and Kenya. The UN Refugee Agency estimates that close to 3 million people will have fled South Sudan by the end of 2019. The UNHCR is appealing for $2.7 billion to provide life-saving assistance to the displaced. The funds will go towards food, water and medicine. South Africa has called upon Interpol to enforce an arrest warrant issued for Zimbabwe's former First Lady Grace Mugabe over an alleged assault of a young woman in Johannesburg last year. The South African police say a warrant of arrest for Mugabe has been put into what they call the Interpol processes. CGTN's Yolisa Njamela has more.
The arrest warrant was issued against Grace Mugabe for allegedly assaulting Gabriela Engels. The former Zimbabwean First Lady allegedly attacked the South African model using an electrical cord at a Sandton hotel in August last year. After the alleged assault came to light in 2017, the South African government granted Grace Mugabe diplomatic immunity, but that was overturned after the alleged victim challenged that decision. Engels was assisted by AfriForum, a lobby group.
AfriForum welcomes the news that an arrest warrant has been issued against Mugabe. We hope that this sends a clear message to everyone that no one is above the law, even if your name is Mugabe.
The South African Police Service say they have now approached Interpol to help enforce the arrest on Mugabe. Police spokesperson Vish Naidu says a process on the matter has been initiated with the International Anti-Criminal Organization. South Africa has an extradition treaty with Zimbabwe, but it's not clear whether this would be enforced.
It is important to understand that all law officials in the country are now obliged to arrest Mugabe if she enters the country. But unfortunately, while she's not in the country, there's not much that we can do from AfriForum's side. It is now the duty of the National Prosecuting Authority to start with extradition proceedings, to extradite her to South Africa to start with the trial. But we will monitor the process.
International Relations Department would not be drawn in to comment. At least one political analyst we spoke to believes that AfriForum has no real interest in this matter, but merely posturing that this case could have easily been settled differently.
I think AfriForum is opportunistically using this case to profile itself, not necessarily for all the legal reasons or for all the broader public good reasons, because I would have thought that alternatively there should have been other means of settling the case between the consenting girl and Mrs. Mugabe.
Chitanga says this case will likely take years or will finally just fade away.
Mrs. Mugabe is no longer such a public figure. She's a former First Lady, but they are a retired family and they are now pursuing their private interests. This also might be problematic in the sense that if Interpol were not to enforce or to take this case seriously, given that they have all other issues that are very critical, very sensitive, with which they are actually chasing to be able to, take an issue of public violence that seriously, then there's a risk that the young girl who was violated may not actually be restituted. And Mrs. Mugabe would probably just stay away until the case dies.
Engels refused to comment. You're listening to for CGTN in Johannesburg, South Africa.
Human rights group Amnesty International has accused the Nigerian military of a slow response to violent attacks across Nigeria. The latest report indicates Nigerian security forces had prior warning of an imminent raid but failed to prevent the killings. The Nigerian army has denied the claims.
Amnesty International in Nigeria, they have an agenda, and the agenda is not to the favor of Nigeria. We are not saying that we may not have one or two cases where there are some infractions here and there. The military itself plans to deal with that. Since we are getting so involved in operations that concern our citizens, right now there is no institution in the military that does not teach a law of arms in their curriculum. And apart from that, we have standing court martials, so that if there is any infraction, those people will be tried militarily, tried through those court martials.
In the Horn of Africa, a much-awaited regional vote has taken place in the southwest region of Somalia following weeks of delays. The newly elected regional leader will serve as a four-year term, but has a huge challenge ahead, including reconciling feuding clans. From Mogadishu, CGTN's Abdulaziz Bello has more.
Abdulaziz Hassan has been elected as the new regional leader for the southwest state. His election is widely seen as yet another victory for Mogadishu and the country's political progress. The 50-year-old, widely known as Laftagaren, won the vote in the first round by garnering 101 votes. A total of 147 lawmakers voted in the election that was marred by weeks of delays.
Southwest has chosen a true leader who will work for the people of this region. I promise to work together with all relevant authorities and ensure that we overcome all the challenges we have faced as residents of Southwest State.
In the run-up to the vote, Mogadishu arrested Mukhtar Robo Abu Mansour, a former Al-Shabaab commander who, despite several warnings, tried to contest the polls. More than a dozen people died in the clashes that erupted following his arrest, prompting the government to boost security in and around the city during the voting day. Experts say Laftagaren's win is a major victory for President Farmajo's government that has been in constant conflict with regional states.
This is a huge victory for the federal government. We now have a regional leader who is pro-government. The former leader was always against the government. This was a litmus test for the government, and it sets up the stage now for the upcoming regional elections in other states.
However, there are concerns that the newly elected leader doesn't enjoy clan support in a region whose communities were deeply divided by recent events in the run-up to the vote. A cabinet minister resigned earlier this week in protest to Robo's arrest. Hundreds more have been arrested by police for causing instability in the southwest state. Reconciling different clans will likely to be the main agenda for the new regional president. Laftagaren is a veteran Somali politician, a three-time member of parliament who has also served as a minister in various Somali administrations. And as political stability slowly returns to Baidoa, the latest vote is expected to set the stage for the battle ahead, with elections due early next year in 3 of the country's regional states. Abdulaziz Bello, CGTN, Mogadishu, Somalia.
To Madagascar now, where both candidates in Madagascar's presidential election have declared themselves winners in the fierce battle for the top position in the island nation. The two factions have been trading fraud allegations against each other. Analysts warn that such sentiments could spill into instability. The European Union Observer Mission has called for calm from the candidates and their supporters. Rajoelina won 39.23% of the first round vote, while Ravalomanana came in second with 35.35%. You're watching Africa Live, still ahead on the program. Spain finds 11 dead migrants in a boat believed to be from sub-Saharan Africa. And a UN report highlights the alarming trends in crime and drugs in West and Central Africa.
You don't find the stories of North Africa by sitting on the sidelines. You've got to get out, go there, and you'll find them. In the bazaars of Casablanca, among the crowds in Cairo,
who come to visit Cairo, the ancient capital of Egypt.
Along the waters of the Nile, along the sands of the Sahara. No one else will take you where we can in North Africa. No one else will show you what it's all about. CGTN, see the difference.
Eleven migrants have been found dead in a boat off southern Spain. The Spanish Coast Guard says they also found 33 survivors who have been taken to a Spanish port of Almeria. Rescue services have been searching for the boat for 2 days in the sea between Spain's southern Andalusia region and the north of Morocco. The migrants are believed to have come from sub-Saharan Africa. Spain has become one of the main points of entry into Europe for migrations ahead of Greece and Italy. Meanwhile, in Senegal, the issue of migration and human rights has topped the agenda at an event in Dakar. Young returned migrants, human rights associations and journalists all participated in the meeting. The gathering provided an opportunity for migrants to give testimonies. Senegal is one of 150 countries who recently adopted the United Nations Global Compact for safe, orderly and regular migration, according to the president of the Senegalese Human Rights Committee. The country is well equipped to put in place a policy to solve current migration-related issues.
We have prepared a national migration policy document. What remains now is to implement and popularize it so that it can produce results. The document is built around 11 main strategic areas. The document takes into account the issues of migration and statistics, as well as migration and economy, including employment, human rights and gender issues.
It is important for the media to be involved in solving this phenomenon as well as migration. As journalists, our role is to advocate through communication, whether radio, television or print.
A United Nations 2018 World Drug Report shows that West and Central Africa are being hit with new and alarming trends in drug trafficking. It has also warned that the region is becoming a transit hub for global drug trade and that drug seizures and opioid use is on the rise. CGTN's Nick Harper reports from New York.
The last time the UN Security Council was briefed on drugs and their potential destabilising influence was in December 2013. Since then, West and Central Africa has seen an increase in both the flow of drugs through the region and the number of people who are using them. The executive director for the UN Office on Drugs and Crime, Yuri Fedotov, said the region now accounted for 87% of pharmaceutical opioids seized globally. Criminal networks were branching out, he said, not just moving cocaine and heroin through Africa en route to Europe, but also the opioid painkiller tramadol. And he said Lagos and Accra's airports were now among the main seizure points for heroin. He said drugs had disruptive and destabilising effects on governance, security, economic growth and public health. UNODC says drug use has increased to more than 34 million cannabis users and 1.8 million cocaine users in West and Central Africa since 2016. Other problem areas mentioned were Guinea-Bissau, northern Mali and the wider Sahel region. Now these last two are of particular concern to the UN. They already are hotspots for organised crime and militant groups. The UN political coordinator Rodney Hunter, who represents the United States, mentioned them and spoke about how the drugs trade can fund criminal networks, which in turn leads to increased instability. Executive Director Fedotov therefore urged the Security Council to stay engaged in finding urgent and determined ways to combat the drugs trade in West and Central Africa. Nick Harper, CGTN, New York.
It has been 55 years since Kenya and China established diplomatic relations. The ties between the two countries have led to shared knowledge, employment opportunities and some intermarriages. CGTN's Wilkista Nyabwa met a Chinese teacher who has built a life in Kenya.
After years teaching at the University of Nairobi, Shu Jing fits in easily. She has lived in Kenya for 9 years. In that time, she has made friends and established herself in her career. Shu teaches Chinese at the university. She moved to Kenya in 2009. China's Hanban organization, the headquarters of the Confucius Institute, was looking for teachers to work at the newly established Confucius Institute at the University of Nairobi.
I registered my name and I passed the exam. So at last I was lucky and chosen by China Hanban. I came here to teach Chinese language and culture.
As a foreigner, Shu became both a teacher and a student, immersing herself in the cultures of her new country. She even learned a few words in local languages and taught a few in return.
I can see Kenyan people, they are very friendly. No matter where you go, in the shop or on the street, they will always use their own Chinese language to say hi to you. Like, ni hao. Yeah, they cannot pronounce very nicely, but they tried to show they welcome you to Kenya.
And when a Kenyan suitor came calling, Shu learned a new language, the language of love. She and her Kenyan husband have 2 interracial children. According to Shu, the opportunities available are a result of the relationship China has forged with Kenya. On the 14th of December, the two countries marked 55 years since they established diplomatic relations. This has opened the door for many Chinese nationals to work in Kenya. And through job fairs, China is also extending the opportunity to university students to seek similar opportunities in Kenyan companies. Shu believes that, much like her relationship, Kenya and China are forging ties that will lead to mutual benefits for their people.
From our story, it's like a pond, but it's small, but it can show something in between China and Kenya, these good relationships. And also for us, we try our best to be a good example to show these two societies, and we can be become good friends.
And so on any given day, she juggles her roles, even finding time to teach Chinese to local politicians. Like her students, they are preparing for the future. 55 years after Kenya and China established diplomatic relations, the two countries are looking forward to greater ties and unprecedented opportunities to help propel them forward. Wilkista Nyabwa, CGTN in Nairobi, Kenya.
Let's now take you to Tunisia, where the Prime Minister has invited Korean businessmen to invest in the North African country. They have been advised to make the most of tax advantages listed in the investment law, asserting the government's commitment to facilitate the opening of the Tunisian business market to Korean and Asian investors.
South Korean Prime Minister Lee Nak-yeon has started a 3-day visit to Tunisia on Wednesday. Tunisian Premier said the visit will give new momentum to relations and is an opportunity to take cooperation to a higher level, in line with the willingness of both governments.
We need to expand the scope of cooperation with South Korea so as to make Tunisia a regional platform for production and export of Korean products to European, Mediterranean and Sub-Saharan countries.
The Tunisian South Korean Economic Forum opened in Tunis. South Korean Premier affirmed his country's willingness to develop bilateral relations with Tunisia in the fields of infrastructure, renewable energy and setting up of SMEs.
8년 전 이맘때 한 청년의 죽음에서 촉발된
Together, we're developing several projects, including the study of photovoltaic power plants in the south and the project to set up the e-people system to encourage civil participation in fight against corruption, 2015 to 2018. I'm the first Korean Prime Minister to be here. I may be late, but I'll work harder to make up for the slow progress in the development of bilateral relations.
Officials placed emphasis on the need to boost partnership, especially in the field of technology transfer, energizing creation and innovation.
The Korea International Cooperation Agency will encourage investment in promising sectors such as communication technologies and modernizing administration. These sectors will contribute to the economic integration of young people, support startups and create new jobs.
Tunisian Premier affirmed the government's willingness to conclude with South Korea a preferential trade agreement that introduces tariff reductions on defined lists of goods in order to step up trade between the two countries.
The visit of the South Korean premier is unprecedented in the history of bilateral relations. It takes place ahead of the 50th anniversary of the establishment of Tunisian-South Korean diplomatic relations. The event will be celebrated in March 2019 in Tunis and Seoul. Aden Shawishi, CGTN, Tunis.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says he wants to normalize ties with Japan despite concerns over the deployment there of an American air defense system. Vladimir Putin spoke about it at his annual marathon press conference in Moscow.
And I have said many times, and I can repeat it again, we do not consider these to be defensive weapons. It's a part of American strategic nuclear potential placed on the periphery. We aim and will sincerely aim at reaching a peace treaty with Japan, because I am convinced, and Prime Minister Abe agrees, the current situation is not normal. Russia and Japan are both interested in the complete normalization of our relations.
Well, let's take a quick look now at headlines at this hour. Sunday's vote in the Democratic Republic of Congo has been delayed. The Electoral Commission is blaming technical issues related to the voting machines for the delays. The opposition have been vocal opponents of the use of electronic voting machines. This comes a week after around 7,000 electoral machines were burnt in a fire. Hundreds of protesters in Sudan have taken to the streets against price increases of bread and fuel. At least one person is reported to have been shot dead in the disturbances. The protests were initially concentrated in the towns of Atbara, Ed Damar and Beber in the River Nile state in the north of the country, but have now spread to other regions. Sudanese police fired tear gas to disperse the protesters. The South Sudan refugee situation is the largest on the African continent. More than 2.5 million South Sudanese refugees are currently struggling to survive in exile. They fled to neighboring Uganda, Sudan, Ethiopia and Kenya. The UN Refugee Agency estimates that close to 3 million people will have fled South Sudan by the end of 2019. The UNHCR is appealing for $2.7 billion to provide life-saving assistance to the displaced. And both candidates in Madagascar's presidential election have declared themselves winners in the fierce battle for the top position in the island nation. The two factions have been trading fraud allegations against each other. Analysts warn that such sentiments could spill into instability. The EU Observer Mission has called for calm from the candidates and their supporters. Rajoelina won 39.23% of the first round vote, while Ravalomanana came in second with 35.35%. And that's a look at your headlines. And let's now go to Ramanyang for a look at the day's business news. Rama.
Thank you very much, Beatrice. Here's what's coming up in business. South Sudan has resumed transporting oil north through Sudan. And Zambia's all about pricing itself out of the market by increasing mining duties. Details on that and plenty more coming up next.
Africa is the nexus of enterprise, and global business will tell you why it matters.
From the mega investment projects to multi-billion-dollar mergers and acquisitions.
Africa today collects, just in terms of revenues from taxes alone, $545 billion a year. If you take 10% of that and you devote it to the energy sector, problem solved.
All this on Global Business, weekdays at this time on CGTN.
Every story starts out like this.
Okay. We'll head up now.
The Beyond the rush of the numbers, there's always a more fundamental question. What happened? Who has been affected? When market-moving decisions are made, who's responsible and why?
Let's get some reaction on ground. Joining us in Johannesburg is Hello, Nairobi.
This is how all stories begin. See how they end. Only on Global Business.
Welcome back. Let's start in Zambia. The country plans to increase mining taxes in a bid to settle rising levels of public debt. So from January, Africa's second largest copper producer says there will be new mining duties. Value-added tax is going to be replaced with a sales tax and royalties will go up. The government estimates that mining tax revenues will go up to about $1.3 billion in the wake of these tax hikes from $800 million this year. But Zambia's Chamber of Mines says that this move risks Zambia pricing itself quite literally out of the market. Chamber President Goodwill Mateo says that the move will result in over 58% of Zambia's copper producers being in a loss-making position at current prices. Mining companies like First Quantum, Glencore and Vedanta Resources account for more than 70% of Zambia's foreign exchange earnings. Elsewhere, South Sudan has exported 1 million barrels of oil through the ports of Sudan since the operation resumed. Sudan's oil minister, Azari Abdel Kadir, says that the development is a result of efforts made by the Sudanese president, Omar Hassan al-Bashir, and his counterpart in South Sudan, President Salva Kiir, to essentially bring peace and stability back to Africa's youngest nation. Oil production in the country was stopped entirely after the civil war started in 2013. South Sudan is home to the third largest oil reserves in sub-Saharan Africa.
This cooperation that we have started and we will continue to have should be turned into serious integration of our two countries and the region as a whole. Nowadays in the world, you cannot stand alone, you must be with somebody.
This ship that lies behind me carries 600,000 barrels. Another ship sailed from the Tom Thawat field in southern Sudan with the equivalent of 600,000 barrels.
The International Monetary Fund head Christine Lagarde has paid a short visit to South Africa's President Cyril Ramaphosa in Pretoria. That was ahead of a meeting with the South African Reserve Bank governor. Lagarde visited South Africa as part of her annual tour of economies in Africa. CGTN's Yuli Sinjamela was there.
In this press conference, Christine Lagarde started off by giving praise to President Cyril Ramaphosa for all his efforts in ensuring that the struggling South African economy is revived. She especially commended Ramaphosa for his endeavors to root out corruption, citing that this would ultimately improve the state of the local economy.
I'm glad to see that there are people like you and me who still work.
Lagarde is in South Africa as part of a tour of African countries. She told journalists soon after meeting Ramaphosa in Pretoria on Wednesday that her organization has faith in the South African president.
I have been always, ever since I have met him, enthused with his focus on governance, his focus on unleashing the potential of South African growth, and we see it as perfectly suited given the challenges ahead, notably the unemployment of youth in South Africa, the need to increase growth and to actually unleash the potential that that youth has in this beautiful country of yours. And I'm absolutely confident that President Ramaphosa has his eyes on the right objectives and is very, very focused on what he wants to deliver for the country together with his team.
Lagarde believes that Ramaphosa's key tasks are to restore investor confidence, improve growth and cleanse the government of corruption.
It so happens that the IMF is also focusing significantly on governance, on the fight against corruption, and I had the honor to receive full endorsement of the entire board of the IMF to actually focus on those issues going forward across the globe and on all our membership.
Lagarde recently called on G20 leaders to urgently de-escalate trade tensions and reverse tariff hikes, warning that they risk slowing global growth. The meeting comes just weeks after data showed that South Africa had in fact just come out of technical recession. Lagarde emphasized in her short visit with Ramaphosa that the private sector needs to be a driver for the increased investment into the economy. Yulisa Njomelo for CGTN in Pretoria, South Africa.
Well, still in South Africa, where motorists have received some relief after a drop in oil prices, which still do remain rather volatile after dropping to just over $60 a barrel. Much lower, in fact, as you'll see in the next hour. Now, with the proposed production cuts by OPEC, that's the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, they want to take 1.2 million barrels off the market starting in January. Oil prices, though, are expected to start rising again. CGTN Sumitra Naidu now reports that could translate into higher prices and more pain for consumers.
It was an erratic year for the global economy in 2018. Emerging markets endured much pain, with some barely surviving. 2019 may be worse with the impending Brexit, US-China trade tensions, and in South Africa, general elections. Forecasting oil prices has become more difficult. The US has become the world's largest crude oil producer, limiting the power of OPEC-producing nations to manipulate supply and demand.
OPEC was talking about production increase at some point a couple of months ago, and this was because oil price was sitting around $87. Now, hardly 2 months later, they're now talking about production cuts. That just goes to prove how much uncertain we live in.
OPEC wants to cut production by over 1 million barrels to lift prices, but the US is offsetting that with production increases. The oil supply glut is expected to continue, which means there is some relief for motorists at the pump.
If we get a positive outcome from that, global economic growth will slow next year, but it'll still be good. It'll be lower, but it'll still be quite acceptable, which should keep demand for oil at a reasonable sort of level.
They are certainly in a very difficult position, because while they are cutting, the US shale producers are ramping up more production, and by them continuing to cut, it will just enable those shale producers in the US to come in and fill that gap. We're going to face a prolonged period of oil which is hovering around the $60 a barrel. I don't see any potential upside for the oil price.
The impending Brexit is expected to unsettle markets more, and a 90-day truce between US and China over trade is merely a short-term fix.
They need to have come up with a concrete plan or a resolution to resolve this trade war. If nothing happens, then we're certainly going to go back and see the imposing of tariffs between the US and China on each other. And that will have a negative impact once again on emerging market currencies, because while those big nations are fighting, it's felt more at the emerging markets levels. And we could potentially see, currency weaknesses if we continue to see the trade war escalation.
As it stands, oil prices are expected to remain at the $60 a barrel level for a while, which could keep a lid on fuel prices. However, if there are any global shocks, it will weigh on the rand. And as a net importer of oil, South Africa won't be spared. There's also the worry that interest rates could go up to limit any impact on inflation. It may still be a while before South Africans feel any real relief from lower oil prices. Sumitra Naidu, CGTN, Pretoria, South Africa.
And finally, the Nigerian conglomerate, the Honeywell Group, has graduated its first cohort from its venture capital platform, Etana. The conglomerate set up Etana earlier this year to fund and support startups to develop and build their own enterprises. Only 4 businesses out of the 208 from 6 African countries that applied were selected for a 4-month-long accelerator program. 2 of them ended up with $25,000 in funding for each of them. CGTN's Deji Badmus filed this report.
For 4 whole months, this was more or less like a workplace for the founders of the 4 startups that made it to the accelerator program. It's the Etana Enterprise Factory, where the founders of the startups spend most of their time being assisted to fine-tune their ideas. 2 of them are setting to get $25,000 in funding from Etana for an 8% equity share of their startups.
So the way this was positioned for us is that 2 of the startups are going to receive $25,000. In fact, a portion of the money has already been paid to them. 2 of the other startups were selected into the program with the idea that all through the program we'll evaluate them and then make a final decision as to if they were going to get money or not.
The 2 startups that are receiving the $25,000 each in funding support are both tech-enabled, one having to do with electricity known as PowerCube, and the second simply called Accountier, an accounting tech platform for small businesses.
Basically, Accountier is a smart cloud accounting platform for SMEs. We help SMEs to manage their financials and their accounting effectively. So everything that has to do with their financial process, from invoice management, expense, inventory, and also bank reconciliation, our platform is the best platform to do that.
PowerCube is looking to bring clean energy to Africans, for now Nigerians, both homes and businesses. We're trying to help them save their current costs by up to 50% month on month.
For the duration of their stay at the Tanna Enterprise Factory, the young entrepreneurs are exposed to Honeywell's extensive network of experts training, workshops and mentorship sessions with experienced entrepreneurs.
We believe that these businesses are positioned well for the future. We believe that through Tanna, not just as businesses, as we now go into our next program and also invest directly with other businesses, we'll be in a position where we would have, within the next 5 years, have invested in up to 50 businesses across not just Nigeria, but across Africa.
Before exiting the accelerator program, the startups were given the opportunity to pitch their ideas and products before a select group of potential investors.
We spent the past 4 months preparing these guys, helping them craft the market strategy, helping them, take a deeper look into how best to analyze their different markets and how best to basically come up with a strategy for them to expand in the different markets. So the demo day is basically the final product for these guys to come up on stage and basically show to the world what they've been doing the past 4 months.
We've opened doors for them so that they're able to sell their products into people we know and into companies that are not just associated with us, companies across the Nigerian economy.
Access to finance is a major challenge for most startups in Nigeria, but Honeywell Group's Tanna is helping to address the problem. It's up to the startups that have benefited from this innovative program to go out there, compete and scale. Deji Badmo, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
All right, then, we're going to be talking about gentle partings and long ones at that when we come back to Global Business. AngloGold is considering listing its shares in either London or Toronto, and that essentially could see it not just leave the JSE in South Africa, it's also perhaps going to spin off all its assets in South Africa as well. We'll have some analysis and answers for you live from Johannesburg at 1800 GMT. For now, though, back to Beatrice.
Rama, thank you. And we still have more news for you here on the program. Here's what's ahead. Morocco inaugurates China's 36th cultural center in Rabat.
Join us in Global Business and see Africa through our eyes.
The greatest journeys, the greatest sights, the greatest adventures.
Here in Qanater, this weir allows the locals to walk on water.
We're far more than just TV news. We're your passport to the wonders of Africa.
To bring you stories of struggle, survival and hope.
So let's explore. CGTN. See the difference.
The China Cultural Center in Rabat has officially been inaugurated. This is the 36th China Cultural Center around the world. Terry Wangari reports.
Located in downtown Rabat, the center covers nearly 2,500 square meters. It has an exhibition hall, a library, a multifunctional theater and classrooms for teaching language, painting, music, dance, and so on. The establishment of Rabat Chinese Cultural Center indicates the deepening of the friendship between the two countries on the basis of bilateral historical exchanges and cooperation. It is now an enhanced interaction, showing a platform for mutual learning and mutual understanding. This is precisely the process of our implementation of the Belt and Road Initiative. We will learn how to develop the friendly relationship between the two people and how to achieve a better exchange of culture. This is really an important step. China's Vice Minister of Culture and Tourism and Moroccan Minister of Culture were among some 100 guests who attended the opening ceremony.
This is a historic day because the People's Republic of China has its own cultural house in Morocco. All Moroccans will know more about Chinese culture, history, and all the elements that connect our two countries.
This is a very good move that will greatly deepen the friendship between our two countries. It's also an important measure after the two countries signed the Memorandum of Understanding on the One Belt, One Road initiative.
The event also featured a show of Chinese cultural heritage such as tea art, brocade embroidery, as well as traditional music performances from both countries. Terry Wangare, CGTN.
China and Algeria are celebrating the 60th anniversary of their diplomatic relations. A big reception was held in the capital city of Algiers. About 1,000 people attended the event, including the Algerian foreign minister and the Chinese ambassador to Algeria. The event concluded with the unveiling of a commemorative stamp issued by the Algerian Post Office to mark the occasion. China and Algeria have long maintained a good bilateral relationship.
To emphasize our common will, a memorandum was signed on last September 4th in Beijing between the two governments, aiming at boosting the cooperation between our countries to build the Silk Road economic belt and the maritime Silk Road of the 21st century.
60 years have passed since China and Algeria established relations that have gone heart to heart and hand in hand. Over the past 60 years, we have committed ourselves to the principle of mutual respect, non-interference in internal affairs, and cooperation based on win-win concept. We have also created a sound and continuous development in the framework of bilateral relations with no obstacles. These relations have yielded abundant fruits with benefits for both countries and people.
And stay with us here on Africa Live as your sports news is still ahead.